Welcome to EU Decoded, the podcast where we break down the key decisions driving EU policy. Brought to you by the EPP Group of the European Parliament, we delve into the issues that matter. And in this episode, we focus on a critical issue, reinforcing EU sanctions against Russia. Joining us are Andrzej Halicki, the Vice Chair of the EPP Group and Chair of the Working Group on External Policies, and also Sandra Kalniete, who is the Vice Chair of the Special Committee on European Democracy Shield and a member of the Delegation to the EU-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee.
My name is Theo Georgichopoulos, a Communication Advisor on Foreign Affairs at the EPP Group, and today I'll be speaking with Andrzej Halicki and Sandra Kalniete. To give our listeners some context, Russia's illegal war on Ukraine threatens both Ukrainian sovereignty and EU stability. A strong, adaptive response is crucial to safeguarding democracy and security. The EU must intensify sanctions enforcement to counter evolving circumvention networks. Now, in its 16th package, the EU sanctions regime remains vital in weakening Russia's war capabilities and economic resilience. Sanctions are a crucial tool, not just economically and politically, but in the long run they can be as significant as military action. However, regarding Russia, many claim that sanctions don't work. Is it like this? Let's listen to David O'Sullivan, International Special Envoy for EU sanctions.
Russia was our fifth largest trading partner in 2021, representing 5.8% of our total trade in goods, equivalent to about 260 billion trade every year. 3 years later, as a result of our sanctions, that trade now represents about 68 billion. That's a decrease of 74% in our bilateral trade with Russia. And that gives you some idea of the scale of the sanctions which we have imposed. And when you look at the revenue side in particular, imports of oil from Russia have decreased by 90%, and increase of imports of gas have gone from 45% of our market down to 13%.
Mr. Halicki, do you think that is this enough? What's your opinion?
No, this is not enough, because if still we have the trade on the level 60 billions, it's 60 billions too much. That's very important to maintain the sanctions. Even we will have the ceasefire agreement, if we have some, I would say, better situation because of the war. We have to remember that the aggressor still is alive, so we cannot give the fuel, new blood to Russian economy. The most important thing is to have Russia weak, not strong.
Mrs. Kalniete, your opinion?
I will continue where my colleague just stopped, because it's not only financial or economic the sanction. It's also a political important tool, and what we also have to maintain that Russia obeys to the ceasefire or whatever agreement we will have, and with sanctions we can push Russia to do that. And another aspect what I consider and always remember, that any money coming into the coffers of Kremlin, it is used for war economy, for a war machine, and everything what we can stop and prevent, it saves lives in Ukraine, and this we have to remember. And even if the United States consider to change the sanction regime, to lift some sanctions, Europe have to stand strong on sanctions, because we have trade with Russia which is 15 times higher than trade with US.
The Russian economy is suffering, and suffering badly. Mr. Putin has been forced into cannibalizing the civil economy in order to run a war economy. What Europe still has to do in order to accelerate the collapse of the Russian economy? Let's listen to Elena Rybakova, Director of the International Affairs Program and Vice President for Foreign Policy at the Kiev School of Economics.
Europe can do three very important things, which it has been doing and can do more of. One is the shadow fleet. For the shadow fleet of Russia, we've seen designations by European Union, by UK, as well as the US. So Europe sits at the core of the Russia's ability to ship this oil around Europe, potentially highly risky for our shores because of the environmental risk and lack of insurance by Russian companies. And Europe is already taking very important steps. It can block off that route or significantly reduce that route. The second one, and I will not talk much, is this export controls that my colleagues have talked about, the strengthening of export controls and being the leader in this area. And the last one is frozen assets.
Mrs. Kalniete, we listened to Mrs. Rybakova, shadow fleet, export controls, frozen assets. How Europe can deal with these obstacles?
First steps already have been done. We have sanctioned 150 ships, but it's not enough, particularly in the Baltic Sea, because Baltic Sea is one of the lifelines for Russian economy and shadow fleet and export of oil and gas. We consider in Baltic states, in Nordic states, that we have to apply more of our national legislation to prevent and stop this trade. But there is also another side, because also those who buy from shadow fleet ships, they have to be sanctioned. Otherwise, it will not work.
Frozen asset, Mr. Halicki, why are we, if I may say, so skeptical on dealing or confiscating these assets?
Oh, confiscation is a legal process, so of course it is complicated, but I think that we have to be united. This is the dimension we have to support and we have to implement. We have to remember that 210 billion coming from the Russian Central Bank, but the other 100, these are assets from companies, oligarchs, and I can say that probably majority of them also because of unfair competition or the dirty money. So it should be confiscated, and it should be a source of money given to Ukrainians to repair the result of the war. Yeah, the money are needed. So this is the best source to have some kind of justice. If the aggressor will not cover by their money, we can use their money confiscated by the legal process.
Let's move now to another aspect. In USA, there is a new administration, and for the moment, nobody knows for sure whether this administration will still implement the sanctions. Let's listen to Mr. O'Sullivan again.
The cooperation with the United States has been exemplary in this regard. Like others, I fear this may not continue necessarily to be the case. I hope it will. But I think we have to prepare for the possibility that it might no longer be the case. And we need to bear in mind that we trade much more, or used to trade much more with Russia than the United States, and that even on their own, European sanctions will continue to have a huge impact on the Russian economy, and we should not lose sight of that.
Mr. Halicki, do you think that in the worst-case scenario, the European only sanctions will be enough?
Well, we have to be united, and of course I would like to be united also with Americans in this dimension. We are not sure that it will be maintained, but I am not so pessimistic. Why? Because of the historical case. Well, the biggest geopolitical change was done by the political and economic pressure in early 90s. It was done together with Americans. So I hope that we will still maintain this cooperation, transatlantic cooperation. If not, we have to be very consequent as Europeans, and we can do that.
There is also another player in this game, China. Many think that China is lending a helping hand to Russia. Is it really like this? Here is the opinion of Mrs. Rybakova.
So China is being very pragmatic. They're interacting, they're having the flows, they're having the sort of the trade turnover with Russia. They're shipping some of our Western components to Russia, but they're not doing investment projects. So it tells you something that, and in the surveys, Chinese companies say that sanctions are working, that's one, but then also the unpredictable Russian environment and lack of rule of law are something that Chinese companies are worried about. If you look at the Russian press, apparently more than 2,000 new Chinese companies have registered in Russia, but 90% of them are in wholesale retail trade. So really, these are companies, it's like a one-day companies focused on either, some simple consumer goods, or maybe it's this on shipment of the goods.
We listened to Mrs. Rybakova. Mrs. Kalniete, what do you think? What is your comment?
I would look geopolitically on the very particular strategic relationship between China and Russia. The idea of United States, which is very present in the current administration, that with establishing better relationship and dialogue with Russia, they would separate Russia from China. I think this is completely illusion, because the economic ties between Russia and China are one-way direction, because China is the one imposing its economy, its know-how, its technological know-how to Russia, and not investing. That is exactly very far-looking Chinese policy to have more and more influence in Russia, to make Russia dependent on Chinese economy. And I'm convinced that the instruments what European Union and United States we have to influence Chinese rise to the highest level in the global economy are too weak, and we have to see the reality.
Now is my last questions to both of you. You are both coming from eastern border states. Your understanding of the situation may differ from the understanding of other countries far away from Russia and Ukraine. In addition, the implementation of sanctions vary from country to country. According to your experience, what has to be done to maintain the pressure even after a possible ceasefire? Mr. Halicki.
Of course, we had the history which creates our understanding of the risk of the situation, which is now much better than, for instance, from the West countries without this experience from Eastern side. But I think that understanding is on a very high level today, and everybody knows that Moscow and Kremlin, this is the capital of evil. And if we are talking about the activity, we are the experts, but I think that the agreement is common on the dimension, and the political unity in Europe is visible.
Ms. Kalniete?
Yes, I think that we have to do very practical and very concrete steps. First of them is the strengthening of EU border infrastructure. This is of utmost importance for all Europe, not only for border countries, eastern border countries. And then we have also to look in the sanctions, what are the practical mechanisms to improve the communication between member states, because sanctions are imposed on the European level, but implemented and interpreted on national level. And there is discordance here, which creates more opportunities for circumvention and evasion. And that would mean coordination of documentation standards, which would help. Then we also have finally to come to introduce the end checks of third countries, how the goods which are certified on the moment of departure, do they reach the point of destination? And this is not checked at all by the European Union. And to increase the common understanding, and decrease the national diversity of interpretations, I think we should establish the help desks in the countries, particularly for the use of small and medium enterprises, because in big enterprises they have particular units or personnel dealing with the sanctions and following the implementation of them. And if we are looking in the future, after the war, when the rebuilding and remonetizing of Ukraine will begin, then we'll need to create a European-level digital credit information register, which will prevent duplication and also a sort of corruptive or other maneuvers in this field.
Mrs. Kalniete, Mr. Halicki, thank you very much for your thoughts and your insights.
And that wraps up this episode of EU Decoded. The EPP Group's position remains clear. Sanctions must continue even after a ceasefire and should not be lifted abruptly. The group stresses the importance of resisting pressure from industry, the economy, or certain member states. A key argument is countering the claim that sanctions are ineffective. The numbers speak for themselves. Trade has dropped from €260 billion before the war to €68 billion, a 74% decline. Well, to stay updated with the latest in EU politics, follow us on social media and visit our website at eppgroup.eu. Thanks for listening.